Blizzard are taking a much more hands-on approach to class balancing in Mists of Pandaria, more so than any version of Classic we've seen so far, well, maybe excluding Season of Discovery. And it's going to be a bit of a unique state as well, because as a baseline the game is balanced around its final patch, and Blizzard are trying to change classes back around to make each spec feel valuable for the start of the expansion. You should also know there will be more rebalancing as time goes on, so that classes are at an appropriate power level depending on what gear is available. So in other words, some classes are getting buffed now and they're going to get nerfed later, so not to become too overpowered. All the class changes that have been made are also unique to PvE and will not affect instance PvP. Buffs made are spec specific too, so if for example Blizzard have buffed the barrage talent for marksmanship hunters, that's only for marksmanship, even though both other hunter specs can get this ability too. So I'll be going through all the 11 classes, going over what's changed for each of their specs, and finding out who are the biggest winners and losers of the Mists of Pandaria Classic class changes so far. I think today we'll begin with the plate wearers and the warrior. For warrior, Prot is proving to be in a very powerful spot in Mists of Pandaria even during this early stage. As expected, more top end guilds may find more use out of this, often as an off tank due to their higher damage intake than some other tanks, but they make up for this by having the potential to do massive damage themselves when actively tanking and having that amazing warrior utility. Protection did also receive a modest increase to their main mitigation spell, Shield Barrier, to help them out on this front too. Really, Prot didn't need too much help to start performing well, but should be in a great place now. Arms is still the go-to DPS spec for the warrior though. Simply put, its single target damage is great, and its burst AoE through cooldowns such as Blade Storm and Bloodbath is essentially unbeatable. On top of that, it's still got that great warrior utility with banners and rallying cry. Fury however did receive buffs to their auto attack damage as well as enrage duration, but I feel as though this spec is just too reliant on a crit stat at this early stage to really get going. It could see more changes during tier 14 if Blizzard really want to push this spec, but as we are at the moment, Fury is still one to watch out for later on. Overall for the warrior, Prot is doing better than expected and should be a fine pick for a tank. Arms is still the go-to DPS, and Fury is improved but still on average just not quite as good as Arms. Paladin heading into Mists of Pandaria was not looking that great if I'm honest, but with a bunch of class changes, nowadays this class is pretty stacked. Retribution has received some of the largest class buffs, maybe the most out of any DPS spec actually, with 10% more damage on all holy power generating abilities and 20% more damage on Templar's Verdict. This spec is now way more competitive and well worth a raid spot. All they were missing as a damage spec was, you know, the damage part of it, which now they definitely have. Holy Paladin has also received massive buffs, which also they very much needed. Your Crusader Strike now acts as if you have hit cap, so no more annoyances missing that when you're trying to generate holy power. You can also act as a ranged or melee character for boss mechanics, depending on how recently you have cast Crusader Strike. So if you want to deal with range mechanics and that's more important for the fight for whatever reason, you'll just stay at ranged and heal as normal. Otherwise you'll go melee, cast Crusader Strike, and not have to worry about griefing the raid by getting hit by range mechanics. I know there were certain fights during Kata where I just found it way easier to stand out than trying to go melee as a holy paladin, so now you can choose what suits you on a boss by boss basis. Really nice quality of life addition. Devotion Aura is now a raid-wide 20% damage reduction. This aligns with Power Word Barrier with how good it is, which is obviously a massive buff. Seal of Insight now grants more mana when meleeing, and your mastery generates 20% more shields. Holy Paladin has been a huge winner from the changes. A very strong raid-wide damage reduction, excellent mana management, and now good heals too. Protection has also seen some minor buffs focusing on raising its survivability through Sanctuary and Sacred Shield. This was its problem area if they had one, otherwise Prot Paladin was also proving to be pretty good. Overall, a massive win for Paladin players from these changes. Whatever spec you want to go, they are now all in a better place. Death Knight next. Blood Decay has seen a great quality of life or buff in a 30-second cooldown on Outbreak down from 60. This will let you get set up on new packs of mobs much easier. Blood Decay has been one of the very few specs in the game to see a nerf as well. The Raise Ghoul and Army of the Dead no longer scale with their vengeance. So DKs were stacking up vengeance, then summoning their minions and doing crazy damage, so this has been dialed back. They still do a lot of damage when they're main tank though. Blizzard have giga buffed Frost DK, increasing the damage from Howling Blast against its primary target, and making it so Obliterate and Soul Reaper scale with a percentage of your mastery. This is a totally new change to MoP Classic that wasn't in the original game. Frost DK mastery just increases how much damage their Frost abilities do, but now they have these two extra abilities added into that mastery as well. So I imagine stacking mastery is going to be pretty good. Because of this, Frost DK are seeing way better performance on the PTR and are set up to be a strong pick. Unholy DK is pretty much staying as it is, which is to say they were very good and they still are very good. Frost feels close to Unholy DK and different fights may suit one spec or the other slightly better though. Overall, Blood DK and Unholy not changed too much, but they were both already very good, whereas Frost DK has seen big buffs and should now be a good pick. So this won't be another expansion where you lock in Survival and forget about the other specs after all. Survival has seen a very small nerf, losing 7% damage on Explosive Shot, impacting their single target damage. Marksmanship, however, has been where the buffs have been seen, including a 10% bonus damage to Steady Shot, Aim Shot, and 15% bonus damage to Barrage and Chimera Shot. These changes appear to have pushed the go-to Hunter spec in Phase 1 of MoP from Survival over to Marksmanship, though Survival isn't far behind. Beast Mastery no changes yet, despite it known to be not a great performer in Phase 1. Maybe there will be more changes pending here before launch, we'll have to see. Overall, Hunter, pretty easy to cover. You can now play Marksmanship, and it may in fact be optimal to do so. Next is Shaman. First, Elemental has received a moderate buff, increasing the damage of their main spell Lightning Bolt by 10%. Enhancement has also seen a raise in the weapon damage of Storm Strike, so it hits that bit harder. Both Shaman DPS specs were already in a good place in MoP Phase 1, so these are small buffs, but probably just about what was needed, and it should still be easy enough to find a raid spot as either. Shaman's overall utility has taken a hit though, as Ancestral Guidance has been nerfed, well, to the floor pretty much. Where it used to convert 60% of damage done or 40% of healing into smart heals on your raid, now it converts 20% for both. This cooldown had the potential to be absolutely busted and let DPS Shaman act as though they were a mini raid-wide cooldown, so I'm not entirely surprised to see it be changed, but this is a big change and you may just consider other talents in that row now. Resto Shamans have also received pretty sizable nerfs. Healing Rain's healing has been lower by 25%, and its duration can be extended by up to 30 seconds through the Conductivity talent, down from 40. Chain Heal has a 20% fall off per target, up from 0, and Riptide's mana cost is increased by 15%. So definitely some big throughput nerfs on the Resto Shaman. Despite this, they are still one of the more important healers to bring to a raid, and will find places in both 10 and 25 player. Their heals are still good by the way, but most importantly their cooldowns haven't been touched, and that was a big reason you were bringing them in the first place. Overall for Shaman, small buffs for both the DPS specs, nerfs to Resto Shaman, but it will still be playable, just not stackable anymore. Next we'll talk Monk, and we'll start with what is possibly one of the most changed specs in the game, the Mistweaver Monk. Enveloping Mist heals raised by 48%, that's your chi spending heal over time. Eminence heals raised by 68%, that's non-auto attack damage as a smart heal, so it's just going to be much more impactful. Revival as your raid-wide cooldown has had its heals raised by overall 22%, and they've had several buffs to their mana efficiency. This has taken Mistweaver from kind of maybe we bring one as a 5th healer to arguably one of the best throughput healers of the expansion, and a spec your raid will definitely want to consider picking up. Windwalker's mastery has been changed so that it increases the damage of Tiger's Eye Brew instead of having a chance to generate bonus charges, and you generate more charges than you previously would have. A nice quality of life change that smooths out the opening rotation of the monk, where before you'd be lacking on brew stacks in the opener. Brewmaster's also received a 25% damage buff to Blackout Kick for some reason. I don't know, they were already doing good damage, but hey, more free damage I guess. Overall, Brewmaster was already doing good, so a buff at all is surprising. Windwalker remains solid, but should just feel smoother to play with the mastery revert, and Mistwalker has seen massive buffs and will be a much more attractive healer for all raids. Rogue hasn't seen that many changes, and the ones that we do have been aimed at assassination and combat. For combat, the energy cost and damage of Sinister Strike has been lowered by 20%. This This means you're just generating more combo points to smooth out the other parts of your gameplay. You can also now see how close you are to gaining combat insight against the target, so you can better plan your cooldowns, and Assassination has had their damage raised by 5%. On the PTR, all 3 rogue specs are seeing representation, with combat being a better pick whether there are multiple targets to cleave, and sub often winning out on single target scenarios. Not too much else to say for the rogue, their specs were miles off of one another to start with. Over for the druids, Balance has received a 10% damage buff and a higher proc chance on shooting stars when multiple targets are active. Ferals now once again learn Nature's Swiftness to allow them to easily proc Dream of Cenarius for bigger bleeds. Feral is still expected to really come online in Throne of Thunder though, thanks to the Rune of Reorigination trinket becoming available, but they're doing okay otherwise. Resto Druid has seen a 5% buff to all their heals and no other changes. Restoration was already in a good place in Mists of Pandaria as a throughput machine, so 5% more of everything is just very nice. Again, this should be an easy one of pickup in a raid. Last but not least is Guardian, which has seen the most buffs out of any tank spec by far. Maul's rage cost has been lowered down to 20 from 30, and they have received a 5% buff to all damage. So they're better than they were, but they still don't feel that great compared to how powerful other tanks still are. Overall for druids, all of their specs have seen buffs. Despite this, it still appears as though Feral and Resto will see the most play early on, and even though Guardian and Boomkin are improved, they still may need a bit more help. Warlock has seen significant buffs focusing on Demonology and Affliction. Affliction has seen big improvements to its single target damage through 50% more damage on Malefic Grasp, on both the damage it deals and how much bonus damage it causes your dots to do. Same deal with Drained Soul as well, just massively boosting its damage. Haunt has also had its damage modifier raised as well. On top of that, Corruption and Agony will be doing a lot more damage. Overall, Affliction was expected to be a spec that came online in Throne of Thunder and beyond, but with all these changes, it's now in a very good place for Phase 1 of MoP as well, and should be the Warlock spec that can win out on multi-target fights. Demonology will be a good pick too, seeing all of its buffs. Its Wild Imp damage has been raised by 43%, and you'll be spawning more Imps. Hellfire and Immolation Aura are going to do 25% more damage, Chaos Wave 50% more damage, and Doom 33% more damage. Destruction hasn't seen changes, but it was already good. For Warlock, now they are kind of spoiled for choice, where before it was expected to be you'll go Destruction and then go Affliction later. Instead, now all 3 specs have huge potential. Affliction likes multi-target fights where targets are going to be living for a long time or you have a long execute phase. Destruction is burst cleave and consistent damage whilst being easy to play, and Demonology has a bit of both, albeit more complicated to pilot. Mists of Pandaria was already a great time to main a lock, and it just got even better. Mage has had buffs too, centered on fire and arcane. Combustion and Pyroblast will deal more damage, and critical mass's increased chance to crit has been raised from 1.3 times to 1.5 times. This basically means there's a less reliance on gear for crit early on, and your spells that need you to crit are going to be doing more damage. Arcane has seen huge buffs, with its single target increased massively. Arcane Barrage's damage has been raised by 19%, and Arcane Blast by 29%, as well as its mana cost lowered. Frost hasn't seen changes. Overall, Mage is in a pretty flexible spot. After the initial fire buffs on the PTR, it's definitely improved, but Frost will still often win out against it. Arcane is by far the most improved Mage spec here if you want pure single target damage, and now seems to be oftentimes the go-to spec, though I think Phase 1 MoP will still be a split between Arcane or Frost, depending on the fight. Finally, we have the Priest. Shadow has seen moderate buffs with a 5% increase to all damage and 18% bonus damage on Shadow Word Pain. This spec can absolutely do well now, but it really does need a multi-target fight to excel. Holy has seen absolutely enormous buffs across the board to make it a much better throughput healer. Echo of Light now heals every 1 second instead of 3, that's just your mastery heals, and Divine Hymn will now heal 50 targets in your raid. This means ticks won't potentially be wasted on guardians or pets. However, its healing has been lowered by 35%. Holy Word Serenity's healing has been raised by 40%, that's your big single target heal, and Holy Word Sanctuary has been raised by 60%, that's your heal you put on the ground. Chakra's Sanctuary healing has been raised by 30%, so that's all your AoE heals, and Chakra Serenity's healing has been raised by 35% too. Again, those are your single target heals. On top of all that, Chakra now has a 10-second cooldown down from 30 seconds, so you really can't mess up by getting in the wrong chakra for the wrong moment now. So yeah, Holy Priest, the most buffed healer here, and is definitely in a much more powerful spot, albeit it still runs into some mana issues early on. Discipline has, however, predictably seen nerfs. Divine Aegis, that's when one of your single target heals crits someone and gives them a shield, now grants 10% less shields. Divine Star healing has been nerfed, though Spirit Shell has been buffed and will last 15 seconds up from 10, so more time to stack this buff when you need it. And biggest of all, Atonement heals have been lowered from 90% of your damage to 70%, so that's all your passive heals just through putting out DPS. The result of this is Discipline is definitely not the throughput healer that it used to be, but just like Resto Shaman, they're still absolutely going to get a raid spot because of Spirit Shell, Power Word Barrier, and Pain Suppression. These buttons are just overpowered. And there we have it, all 11 classes covered, and some idea of how each has changed in MoP Classic so far. Overall, tanks are all in a great spot and doing tons of damage. Blizzard have aimed to buff up some underperforming DPS rather than nerfing ones that are too good, and the biggest changes have taken place in the healing meta. So instead of just stacking Disc Priest and Resto Shaman in MoP, now you're much more incentivized to take one of each healer, which is pretty ideal in my opinion. And if you're still on the fence about what to play, I want to give you one final thought, which is quite important. Whenever I do these class videos, I don't say play what you want to play, because what you want to play may just not be that good in a classic expansion, and typically we have a really good idea of what will do well and what won't, and I think it's just better to say so. And what everyone wants at the end of the day is to be invited to groups for raid or PvP. But with ongoing class balancing and Blizzard making an effort to help out underperformers, for once MoP Classic will be an expansion where you should just follow what you think fits you best as a main, because there is no guarantee that something will remain overpowered forever. And remember, you're playing a class, not just a spec now. The chance that you will be swapping between different DPS specs as the expansion goes on, if your class has them that is pretty high, I'd say. But that's all I've got for you today. Let me know your thoughts on all the changes and whether it's impacted what you will be picking in MoP in the comments down below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.